I was sitting in a cafe recently with two friends. You know, the kind of guys who are usually chasing the next big thing, the dream.
Right.
And one of them, he just looked absolutely wrecked. I mean, his face was practically sculpted by unpaid overtime and stress.
I know that look. We all do, I think.
Exactly. And in that kind of setting, you expect a certain conversation, right? Someone's new side hustle, their grind set, how they're going to crush their targets. But then the exhausted one, he puts his drink down and says something that just completely changed the air in the room. He looks at us, dead serious, and he says, I think it's actually healthier if we just accept that we're average.
Wow. That's a brave thing to say out loud these days.
It felt like it. I was waiting for the pushback, but it never came. The other friend just nods like it's the most obvious thing in the world and says, people today just live to grind. They make money, but they forget to actually exist.
That is powerful.
It was such a jarring shift. You know, our social feeds are just flooded with high achievers. And here was this moment of pure relief and the opposite idea. It made me think about my own past working until 3 a.m., ending up with acute gastritis.
Oof.
And it forced me to ask this question that feels almost illegal to say. What if the secret to a good life isn't about being special, but about embracing the art of being mediocre?
That question, that illegal question, is exactly why we're doing this deep dive. Because what you're describing, the exhaustion, the gastritis, your friends hitting a wall, that's the real output of a system that promises us everything but delivers, well, a lot of anxiety.
It feels like a philosophical crisis, really, how we define success.
It is. It's a huge crisis. We're sold this idea that relentless ambition and, consumerism are the path to happiness, but our lived experiences are screaming the opposite.
Right. The promise of hyperachievement, it was supposed to be liberating, but instead it feels like it just led to this collective burnout where we confuse being busy with being valuable.
Precisely. Yeah. That's the core tension. The pursuit of success, especially past the point of just having enough, it actually starts to work against the happiness it's supposed to bring. We're just mistaking frantic energy for real value.
So our mission today is to kind of cut through that noise.
Yes. We're going to use hard data and some really ancient wisdom to make the case for sufficiency, for knowing when enough is actually enough.
Okay, so let's lay out the roadmap. How are we going to tackle this rebellion against the grind?
We've got a three-part approach. First, we're going to really dig into that personal cost you mentioned. We'll look at the data and some specific stories from the corporate world to see why this mindset fails us.
Okay.
Second, we'll pivot to the business case. We're talking massive studies, global trials, the kind of empirical evidence that shows pretty definitively that employee well-being actually drives performance. There's a real business case for slowing down.
And third.
And finally, we'll look back. We'll explore the philosophical blueprints from thinkers like Aristotle, Epicurus, and the Taoists. They gave us the instruction manual for finding enough thousands of years ago, and we'll see what that means for our whole macroeconomic picture.
Let's start with that cost then. It feels so intuitive that chasing infinite goals causes stress and burnout. But is this just something we feel, or is there hard evidence that this crisis is getting worse on a global scale?
Oh, it's absolutely not just anecdotal. This is a measurable global trend. Right. Take Japan, for instance, a culture we often associate with intense work ethic.
Right, the classic salaryman image.
Exactly. Well, a large-scale study there tracked over 1 million employee observations between 2017 and 2019. And the finding was stark. Job stress was steadily, measurably worsening over that entire period.
And that's even before the pandemic hit and changed everything.
That's the key point. The pressure cooker was already heating up year after year. The psychological and physical fallout was already a rising tide.
It makes perfect sense. The system just demands more and more from us, more availability, instant responses, and our bodies are footing the bill. But we are seeing a shift, right? It often starts with just one person saying, I can't do the 80-hour week anymore.
And we have some really compelling examples of that pivot from inside these high-stakes environments. There's this story of a woman named Sarah.
Okay.
She was a director of operations at a tech unicorn, right in the heart of that grind set culture. For years, her whole identity was tied up in that lifestyle. 80-hour weeks weren't just normal, they were a badge of honor.
That's the story we're all told, isn't it? That intensity equals innovation, and if you're not exhausted, you're not adding value.
But the reality was completely different. Underneath all that frantic activity was a huge amount of corporate inefficiency. They had high turnover, and crucially, real innovation had just stalled. Everyone was too exhausted for deep, creative work. They were just reacting all day.
So what was the breaking point for her?
It was a severe, stress-induced health scare. Pretty similar to your own experience with gastritis, actually. And that forced her to make a really dramatic pivot. She took a big pay cut to join a legacy publishing house.
A publishing house? That's a world away from a tech unicorn.
A completely different world. And they were experimenting with a radical idea. A results-only environment with a strict no emails after 5 p.m. rule.
That must have been a culture shock, like a detox.
It was, but the results were just undeniable. Here's the kicker. Her new team, working about 30% fewer hours, actually outperformed her old startup team on key deliverables within a single year.
Wow.
And she realized that all that frantic energy from her old job, the late nights, the weekend pings, it was just, and this is a great phrase, anxiety masquerading as productivity.
Anxiety masquerading as productivity. That phrase changes everything. It's not about being lazy. It's recognizing that the constant adrenaline rush is actually inefficient.
It's profoundly inefficient for producing thoughtful, quality work. Now, Sarah's story is about boundaries and hours, but this other case, a trader named Elias, he takes it a step further by capping the reward itself.
Okay, tell me about Elias.
So Elias was a high-frequency trader in New York, the absolute pinnacle of capitalist success. We're talking 7-figure bonuses, a penthouse, the whole deal.
Living the dream, so to speak.
Supposedly. But he described feeling this hollow vertigo. He'd achieved everything the script said he should want, but he just felt detached. He realized the goalposts for satisfaction just kept moving further away with every million he made.
That moving goalpost is so destructive. It basically guarantees you'll never be satisfied. You hit your target, and immediately the target is irrelevant. You need the next bigger thing just to feel okay.
And he realized that the fear of losing what he had was more powerful than the joy of gaining more. So his act of rebellion was to apply this ancient philosophical idea to his modern life. He set a strict financial cap for himself.
A self-imposed wealth limit for a Wall Street trader. That's
why.
wild.
It's totally revolutionary. Anything he earned above his self-defined level of sufficiency, he immediately donated. He forced himself to actually define what enough meant to him personally, outside of what the market told him.
So he basically used the system to reject the system.
Exactly. In a culture designed for infinite want, the most liberating thing you can do is define your own limit. He took back the power by refusing to be controlled by either the fear of loss or the compulsion to just keep accumulating.
So we have the hypercapitalist who opts out, but we're also seeing this shift in younger generations, right? People who are just starting out and already budgeting for freedom instead of stuff.
That brings us to Kenji, a 28-year-old software engineer in Tokyo. He's kind of the embodiment of this macroeconomic shift, what some people call the Satori consumer.
And what does that mean?
Well, his demographic would traditionally be the engine of consumerism, buying luxury brands, bigger apartments, fueling GDP through constant spending.
But Kenji took a different path.
A totally different path. He negotiated a 4-day work week, which meant pay cut, but he consciously chose more life over more money. And his spending is super intentional. It's not designer clothes. It's high-quality gear for, like, reading in the mountains.
He's investing in experiences, not status symbols.
Precisely. And the data on him is fascinating. His consumer spending has plummeted, which, as we'll get into, terrifies traditional economists. But his personal savings rate and his reported happiness scores, they are, quote, through the roof.
Okay, I want to pause on that. Why does a guy like Kenji terrify traditional economists?
Because our entire Western economic model is built on one thing, continuous growth. And that growth is fundamentally tied to continuous consumption. Kenji proves that a person can be happier, get a higher emotional return by consuming less.
He's budgeting for freedom?
He's aggressively budgeting for time and freedom, not for status. He's redefining what utility even means.
Okay.
And the moment a lot of people decide that enough is enough, the whole engine of infinite material growth just starts to sputter, even if the population is, way happier.
He's found a non-monetary kind of wealth.
Yes. And for him, all that frantic marketplace energy is just noise. It's a distraction from a life that's already sufficient and fulfilling.
These stories, Sarah, Elias, Kenji, they're so powerful. But a skeptic might say they're just anecdotes, exceptions. What happens when we look at the big picture, at large-scale corporate data? Is there actual proof that happier workers are better for the bottom line?
The evidence here is pretty overwhelming. And it really does put the nail in the coffin of the old hustle culture myth. We can look at a massive meta-analysis from the Gallup organization.
And this wasn't a small survey.
Not at all. We're talking 339 independent research studies. It covered almost 1.9 million employees and over 82,000 business units. 49 industries, 73 countries. This is hard global data.
So what was the big takeaway from all of that?
The key finding is a significant, strong, positive correlation between employee satisfaction and firm performance. It makes an utterly compelling business case for worker well-being. This isn't a nice-to-have HR thing. It's a core business strategy.
Okay, let's break down those numbers. What were the specific correlations?
So with customer loyalty, they found a substantial positive correlation of 0.31. And that makes sense, right? A happy, non-stressed employee has more emotional energy. They're more patient, better problem solvers.
Right. Their internal state gets mirrored in the customer's experience.
Exactly. Then employee productivity had a positive correlation of 0.20. And this one is huge. Staff turnover had a strong negative correlation of 0.25. High satisfaction means people are much less likely to leave.
Which is a massive cost saving in itself.
A huge saving. And finally, profitability showed a positive correlation of 0.16. Now that's a bit lower, but it's an expected downstream result. Profit follows from happy customers, productive staff, and lower turnover.
So the idea that you need to be stressed and miserable to be effective is just, well, it's objectively false according to this data.
It's fundamentally false. And we can even go beyond correlation to the causal mechanism, which is where emotion theory comes in. It suggests that positive emotional states don't just result from good performance, they actively drive better cognitive performance.
How does that work exactly? How does being happy make you more creative or innovative?
It's powerful. Studies have found that being in a good mood is an antecedent of creativity, meaning the good mood has to come first. And it's not always immediate. The effect can incubate for up to 2 days. A good mood on Monday might spark an idea on Wednesday.
A 2-day lag. That's fascinating. What's the mechanism there?
Well, psychologists think there are 3 things at play. First, a positive mood increases the number and variety of thoughts you have. Second, it encourages defocused attention, letting your mind wander and make those unexpected connections.
Like Kenji reading in the mountains.
Exactly like that. And third, it boosts your cognitive flexibility, making it easier to switch between different ideas and connect things that seemed disconnected before.
So that quiet, unproductive time isn't just leisure. It's actually priming the pump for high-value ideas.
Absolutely. And we've even seen this in lab experiments. They'd give people a happiness boost like show them a comedy clip or give them some chocolate, and their productivity on a simple task like summing numbers would increase by up to 12%.
12% is a huge gain for something so simple.
It is. And the opposite is true too. People who experience a negative life event perform worse. So this isn't subtle. It's a direct causal link between your emotional state and your cognitive output.
Okay, so let's take this from the lab into the real world. What about these big experiments with a reduced work week? Does less time actually mean the same or even better output?
The global trials have been decisive. The UK pilot, for example, involved 61 companies. And it wasn't just that they maintained output with less time. On average, they saw a 35% increase in revenue compared to the same period the year before.
A 35% increase in revenue while working fewer hours? That's incredible. What about the human metrics like burnout?
Just as impressive. Staff departures fell by 57%. Employees reported 71% less burnout and 39% lower stress. And the real proof, 92% of the companies continued the 4-day week after the trial ended. It's a sustainable model.
And we saw this in the public sector too, right? With the Icelandic trials.
That's right. Civil servants in Iceland cut their hours from 40 to about 35 or 36 a week. They saw higher productivity and huge improvements in well-being. The results were so compelling that now 86% of Iceland's entire workforce has either moved to a shorter week or has the right to.
It became a new national standard.
It did. And we even see it with smaller interventions. A Chinese travel agency let some call center agents work from home. They saw a 13% performance increase. Part of it was working more minutes, fewer breaks, fewer sick days, and part of it was just a quieter environment. And turnover was cut in half.
But this can't be a one-size-fits-all solution. The Gallup data you mentioned showed that the strength of this connection varies by industry. Why is that?
That's where the nuance is. The positive link holds up everywhere, but its strength can tell us where interventions might have the biggest impact.
So where did job satisfaction matter most to the bottom line?
The link between satisfaction and profitability was actually strongest in manufacturing, a correlation of 0.42, which is significantly higher than the average.
Why there?
The theory is that in manufacturing, employee attitude has a very direct impact on hard costs. A happy, engaged worker is more careful, which means better quality control, higher efficiency, and fewer safety incidents. The link to profit is just very clear and immediate.
And what about a high-stress environment like finance?
Finance also showed a really strong link, especially between well-being and productivity. The hypothesis there is that because the baseline stress level is so high, there's just more room for improvement. A small increase in well-being can unlock huge productivity gains because you're starting from a lower emotional base.
This all sounds so optimistic, but you have to wonder about the pitfalls. Surely it can't be a perfect solution for everyone. What are the cautionary notes from these studies?
And that caution is vital. A 4-day week isn't an automatic magic bullet. In that UK study, for instance, a significant minority of people, about 36%, said their work intensity actually increased.
So for them, it just became a 4-day grind, compressing 5 days of work into 4.
Precisely. If the organization's culture doesn't fundamentally change, you risk increasing stress for some people. The Icelandic study noted that managers, in particular, felt more pressure to meet deadlines and found scheduling much harder.
So it's not just about changing the calendar, it's about changing the work itself.
It has to be a deep strategic shift. The successful companies were ruthless about cutting out useless meetings, streamlining communication. Without that redesign of the workflows, you're just setting people up to fail in a shorter amount of time.
So the data is clear, the hustle fails the individual, and well-being is good for business. But that original feeling, the one my friend had in the cafe, that relief in being average, that's a philosophical impulse. Where do we turn when the spreadsheets can't answer the question of purpose?
That's when we have to turn to the thinkers who understood human nature long before we had meta-analyses. Let's start with Aristotle. His whole framework is built around the idea of eudaimonia.
Which we usually translate as happiness, but it's more than that, right?
It's much deeper. It's more like human flourishing or living well. And you achieve this through Aristo, which means virtue or excellence practiced as a habit over your entire life.
But excellence sounds like high achievement. How does that square with the idea of being sufficient or mediocre?
It's all in his doctrine of the mean. For Aristotle, virtue is never an extreme. It's the perfect middle ground between two vices, a vice of excess and a vice of deficiency.
Can you give an example?
Sure, think of courage. The deficiency is cowardice, right?
Yeah.
But the excess is recklessness. Courage is the balanced virtue in the middle. Now apply that to ambition. The deficiency is sloth, but the excess is overambition, the modern hustle that leads to burnout.
So mediocrity, in this sense, isn't laziness. It's the wise pursuit of that balanced middle path. It's avoiding the destructive excess of the grind.
You've got it. The goal isn't maximum output. It's optimal, sustainable balance. And to find that balance, Aristotle said we need an intellectual virtue he called phronesis.
Practical wisdom.
Practical wisdom. The ability to know the right thing to do at the right time for the right reasons. It's what prevents us from falling into what he called a crasia, knowing what's good, but failing to act on it. And we see that all the time in business, don't we?
All the time. A leader knows they should focus on long-term health, but the pressure of the quarterly report makes them choose the short-term, reckless path.
That's a perfect example of a failure of phronesis.
So Aristotle gives us the balanced action. What about Epicurus? When we hear Epicurean, we think of, lavish indulgence.
And that is probably the biggest misreading in the history of philosophy. We have to reclaim Epicurean hedonism. For Epicurus, the goal wasn't gluttony. It was ataraxia, serenity, freedom from fear and aponia, freedom from physical pain. His path to happiness was through reason and logic, not excess.
He was all about radical simplicity.
Radical simplicity and deliberate frugality. His core belief, and this is so counter to our modern world, was the wealth required by nature is limited. You just don't need endless stuff to be happy. In fact, chasing it only brings anxiety.
And he had a phrase for this, right? To live inconspicuously.
Lathabaiusas. Live inconspicuously. Avoid the chase for fame, wealth, and power, because it just creates mental disturbance. It makes you dependent on things you can't control.
So what did he say we should prioritize instead?
Friendship. Real companionship, honesty, kindness. He believed that was the most important foundation for a happy life, and that it was best achieved through simplicity in a community of trust. If you get your status and respect from your friends, you don't need to get it from buying things.
It's a completely different value system. And this idea of non-striving feels perfectly embodied in Taoism, too.
It is. Taoism gives us the concept of wu-wei, which is often translated as effortless action or non-striving. It identifies the exact same conflict we're talking about. Consumer culture's endless chase for desire leads to chronic anxiety. We're always fighting against the natural flow of life.
So how does Wu Wei offer a solution for someone today trapped in that cycle?
It's a blueprint for finding happiness by, well, stopping the fight. It means living in the present, accepting life's natural rhythm, and detaching from those insatiable material desires. It's not about doing nothing. It's about rowing your boat with the current instead of against it.
So the constant focus on striving and consuming, it erodes our real sources of happiness.
It erodes our intrinsic motivation. It replaces it with this desperate need for external validation, more titles, more things. Taoism says the answer is to cultivate inner peace and find fulfillment in a simple, authentic life.
Okay, so we have the personal stories, the corporate data, and the philosophical wisdom. Now let's tackle the biggest system of all, the global economy. Why did we get so trapped in this idea that we need endless growth, which means endless consumption, which means endless ambition?
The trap was set centuries ago in the foundational assumptions of classical economics. Thinkers in the 18th and 19th centuries basically saw nature as an infinite resource to be exploited.
A limitless system.
An open, limitless system. It was a very mechanistic view of the world. And it led to an economic model that prioritized one thing above all else: endless material production and profit. It almost completely ignored human needs that couldn't be measured in money.
So the system was all about the means production and completely forgot about the end, which is human flourishing.
Exactly. And by the early 20th century, especially in the West, we'd actually reached a point where we could produce enough to satisfy everyone's basic material needs. The logical next step should have been to shift focus to distribution and quality of life.
But that didn't happen. Why not?
Because it wasn't profitable.
Yeah.
It wasn't profitable for the owners of capital to just stop the growth engine. So instead of embracing sufficiency, the system had to engineer a continued artificial need for more and more consumption.
Through advertising and credit.
Through aggressive advertising and easy credit. They learned how to manipulate our emotional and moral needs to keep the engine of overproduction running long after our basic material needs were met. It engineered the emotional need for stuff because it couldn't profitably address our real human need for security.
So the moment the economic engine couldn't maintain a natural balance, it had to start feeding on our psychological vulnerabilities.
That's a great way to put it. And this brings us to the philosopher Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, and how our economic system just fails to account for most of them.
Right. The system is based on this idea that money is the measure of all things.
Which is a deeply flawed premise for organizing a human society. Mainstream economics tries to be a value-free science, so it really only accounts for Maslow's most basic physiological needs: food, water, shelter, and only in terms of how much they cost.
So it completely ignores the higher developmental needs.
It ignores them, or worse, it actively undermines them. Take the second level, security. The need to be free from fear and chaos. The modern market thrives on insecurity. The gig economy, fear of job loss. It uses that anxiety as a tool for control.
The market needs us to be anxious.
It does. And then there's the third need, affiliation friendship. The market weaponizes that need too. Advertising constantly tells you you can buy belonging. Wear this brand, own this car, and you will be part of the group. It replaces genuine Epicurean friendship with transactional consumption.
So if the system is designed to undermine our needs for security and belonging, how can we ever achieve that Aristotelian eudaimonia, that true flourishing?
The only way forward is a radical qualitative shift in our goals. We have to put emotional and moral development on the same level as, if not ahead of, economic growth. The goal can't just be to produce more stuff, it has to be to produce more healthy, contented human beings.
So what would that actually look like for a company or for economic theory as a whole?
It would mean redesigning work to be an end in itself, not just a means to profit. A place where people can find genuine esteem and a sense of contribution through their participation, not just a paycheck.
And for the economy.
For the economy, it means we have to reorient the entire machine. Its purpose has to be ensuring basic material needs for all, and the institutional satisfaction of our emotional needs. We have to subordinate metrics like GDP to new concepts of well-being and emotional stability.
So what's the new measure of success then? If it's not just about money, what is it?
The new measure has to integrate psychology and morality. Economists would have to learn to arrange the numbers so that efficiency means improving not only the material, but also the emotional and moral circumstances of one person without worsening the emotional and moral circumstances of anyone else. That becomes the new ethical boundary for growth.
That's a profound shift. We started this deep dive with a moment of exhaustion in a cafe, And we've ended up with a mandate to redesign global economics around human sufficiency.
The synthesis is incredibly powerful, and it runs on two tracks. On one track, you have the hard data. The corporate numbers are clear. Well-being and sufficient work time are positively correlated with the bottom line. It completely refutes the idea that stress is necessary for success.
The business case for slowing down is, as you said, ironclad.
It is. And on the other track, you have the philosophical one. The idea of being mediocre is totally redefined. It's not a failure to launch, it's a strategic choice.
It's the sufficient life.
It's the sufficient life. It's centered on Aristotle's golden mean, on Epicurus's defined limits, and on Taoist wisdom of non-striving. The philosophy of infinite personal greed has brought us to a dead end, with ourselves and with our planet. The only way back is to embrace a model of sufficiency.
So this transition isn't about surrendering to laziness.
Not at all. It's a strategic reoptimization of our energy and our purpose. It's the correction we have to make to allow for sustainable excellence, real creativity, and genuine flourishing for us as individuals and for society as a whole. It's about building a foundation of contentment rather than a frantic chase that only leads to burnout.